So my name is Kyle Boon. First, I just want to say the conference has been fantastic so far. So really happy to have me out here. It's my first time in Spain. I'm just having a great time, and I hope I can make it back again. If you ever want to go to Great Conf US, that's where I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and it's a great time as well. So a little bit about who I am. Like I said, my name is Kyle Boon, my email and my Twitter handle. I'm a software engineer at Smart Things. We build Internet of Things. We do home automation software and hardware. And I'm also the co-owner and maintainer of a little website called Cellar HQ, which is a beer website. I know that here in Spain you guys don't drink a lot of beer, but it's basically like wine, but different. And the talk is actually about, welcome everyone. So the talk is actually about JOOQ, which we used for Cellar HQ. Almost 2 years ago at GreatConf, my friend and I bought this website from someone. It was a Grails 1.3 web app. And if you've ever seen Bert Equus' Grails Worst Practices talk, which I think he did either last year or the year before, but the code that we bought from this guy was essentially all of the Grails worst practices in one project. He rolled his own security, he didn't use Boon. It was terrible. And so we didn't really know that before we bought it. We knew it was Grails, but we hadn't seen any of the code. And so after we got it, we knew it needed to be completely rewritten from scratch. And when we did that, we decided we were going to use Ratpack. At the time, Ratpack was like way before 1.0. I think it was in 0.8, maybe 0.7. And so when we were looking for persistence to use with Ratpack, we looked at quite a few things before picking JOOQ, including things like JDBI and Hibernate, of course. And we eventually picked JOOQ. So what is JOOQ, right? It stands for Java Object-Oriented Querying. It's an alternative to using, an ORM like Hibernate, or doing straight JDBC, or like God forbid, writing SQL and strings and doing that manually. It's a Fluent API, and some of the things I really like about it. So there's code generation, so you don't have to sort of create your own POJOs for all your tables. It's type safe, and it actually will let you. So if you have a where query that's operating on a string, it'll actually make sure you pass a string into it, which is a great feature. It supports basically every SQL feature that you can think of, including vendor-specific things, which is something that you typically can't do with Hibernate and things like that. For example, it also supports stored procedures natively, which is a great feature, because stored procedures can sometimes be much faster than other things. It's also free for open source projects, which is what I use it for. There's a paid version as well if you want to use Oracle or any database that isn't MySQL or Postgres or open source database. One thing that it doesn't do is manage transactions, but you can do that yourself. So here's a giant list of databases that are supported for free. Some of these I've used, some of these I've never even really heard of. I don't know what Kubert is. But we use it with Postgres in Heroku, and it works great. I've used it with MySQL as well, and SQLite, and works great with all those things. Then here is a license-supported version. So this is the one you're gonna actually pay for. So if you're using a SQL Server or Oracle or other things that I really would never want to use unless someone absolutely forced me to, then you can go for the paid version and get support. I always like to know who's building something if I'm going to be using it, because I like to know that they know what they're doing and that it's going to continue to be supported. So Lucas Skeeter, I think that's how you pronounce his name. So he's like the founder and CEO of a company called Data Geekery. I don't know how many people work for that company, but he's, essentially the face of it, and he is like everywhere on the internet. If you ask a question on Stack Overflow about SQL or on Quora about SQL, he will almost always respond. I have been Googling completely unrelated things to JOOQ that were SQL related and find his name all over the place. He's also a really nice guy. When I gave a talk a lightning talk about JOOQ for the first time like a year or so ago. He like watched the video and he sent me a bunch of stickers for free, like from Switzerland. Like, he's just a really nice guy. And he does. I bring up this blog post because he wrote this about pivotal dropping Ruby last year. But if you're interested in looking at it, it was a little bit controversial. He has really specific opinions about supporting open source and how. He has really specific opinions about supporting open source and how companies could and should go about that. And you may or may not agree with those opinions. I don't think I necessarily do, but he's a really smart guy. He's a worthwhile person to follow, even if you aren't interested in JOOQ eventually. So just to jump into some actual code. So this is the world's simplest thing that you can do. A lot of these examples are taken from Seller HQ, so a lot of them are beer related. So this essentially is just running a select on the entire table and then putting that object, mapping that object into a pojo, which is in this case called drink. Create here is an instance of a class called DSL context, which is a core JOOQ class, and then drink in all caps is a static reference to a table that was generated by the code generation tool, which we'll look at later. And then the drink class reference there is a pojo that was also generated by a code generation. So you're just going to end up with a list. So it's really very simple. Here's another name. So this would just be if you wanted to get just a list of names. And again, so we're going to put it into a string and we're going to generate a list, but we're still selecting from that same table. And in this case, we're getting an exact column out of the table. More select examples. So this first one is it's a simple aware condition. So this is an example of showing the type safety. So it knows that the column drink.name has a string in it, and so it'll actually make sure that when you pass Furious, which is the name of a very popular beer in Minnesota, into there, that you're passing a string. So if you were to give it an integer or something else, you're going to get an exception. Assuming that if you're using Groovy, you're using compile static or type check, which I recommend that you always do if you can. And then in this case, we're doing, instead of fetch into and getting a list, we're doing fetch one, and we're going to put that into a single instance of the drink class because we are assuming that there are no other beers named Furious. The second one is just an example of ignoring case, very simple and similar. And then the last one here is doing an in query, so just making sure that the name is in one of those two names. Too hard, there's another IPA from, I think that was from Michigan. So you can do joins really easily. So in this case, we're joining the drink table, which holds all the beers, with the style table, and we're going to select everything that's an IPA. So again, the keys.drink underscore fkey underscore drink style ID is a generated code, and that refers to a specific foreign key between those two tables. There's a simple naming convention that it uses to do that. And then, again, type safety, we're using, make sure that the style name is a string, and we're going to get a list of drinks out of that. This one is a slightly just more complicated join, where we're going to join into two tables, and we're going to select specific things out of each table. In this case, so you notice at the bottom I didn't do the fetch into and give it a thing. So this will actually return a list of records, and then you could either map that manually or create a new pojo that had an organization name and a style name on it, and it would map those correctly. So we're gonna get, because there's 3 columns in this name, we want to rename that in the record so that it comes back, and then we're just joining on the organization table, and then doing a left outer join on the style table in case there's beers that don't have a style listed. So you can do counts really easily. And this was actually, I think I showed on the Celery HQ main page, there's at the bottom, it just says like, how many beers we have in our database, like kind of simple stuff. So this is the code that actually grabs that. So you can build up queries like this, sort of selecting which fields you want to get, right? And then at the bottom, we just select all of those and then put them into, and this homepage statistics is a POGO that isn't generated because it doesn't have a direct representation of the database. This is just a specific way we want to query our data and put it into this object. And this is another thing I actually really like because I think that if you're using Gorm or things like that, doing things like this is a little bit harder where you want to map into a non-entity, like Hibernate entity or something like that. So we have a way to get data into the database, right? Otherwise it's not a very useful thing. So in this case here, we're just doing an insert, and we're doing an insert into a table, and then you can give a list of columns after that, and then a list of values, and then we want to get the ID back from that and fetch that into a record, and then we could grab the ID out of that record if we were going to return that as a part of a REST call or something like that. And then the second one is just doing a simple update, right? So just again, you just say the name of the table and the column you're going to set, right? And then you set your where, and then you just call execute on that, and it's not going to, in this case, it's not going to return anything. Deleting is similar, so you just give it the table name, the column ID, and the where clause, and then you just call execute. We're not going to get anything back from that query. So there is an active record type pattern. So if you're familiar with Rails and not Grails, right, and you've used active record in there, this is a very similar implementation. So when you have an instance of a drink record, and this is another code-generated class, then you can call update and store and other things directly on that without having to call and build your SQL specifically, which is nice because this way, when you have, if you're adding new fields and things, you don't have to go and update every single insert query, which is one of the things that sort of drives me nuts. Like if you're gonna use like JDBI or something like that, you often have to go in and update every query when you add a new column to your database, and with JOOQ you don't need to do that. So it's basically we're going to create a new record. We're going to give it the table name, and then the lowercase drink in this case is a POGO, and then it's going to create a record. And then because there's a couple fields that we don't want to update, essentially the POGO doesn't have a couple of columns on it, and so I just reset those, and that will just it's tracking which fields have become dirty, and so in this case it just says ignore the fact that this is dirty because it's null, and leave whatever was already in the database there. Which, particularly if you have like IDs and things like that, that can be important. And then if drink record ID exists, that already is there. Otherwise, we're going to insert it. So we either call update or store, and then drink record will be updated with the complete row from the database at that point, and so I'll put it back into a POGO and then return that from a DAO class. This is a really neat little feature where essentially you can do exporting and importing directly from the database in one line. So if you just have like a fairly simple like we have a feature where you can export CSVs that you can of your seller, and you can use that in Excel or Google Docs or whatever you want to do, right? So basically, any query that you run, you fetch, and then you can just call format CSV or format XML or format JSON, and it will return a string that has been formatted in that manner back to you. And then it's like the easiest way I've ever gotten a custom CSV format out. And then because you can pair that with selecting from like with a couple different joins. I can actually show how to do this. So this is what we do here. So we have a pretty long query here. It's selecting a very specific set of things from a bunch of different tables that people like to have. And then it's also doing sorting down here, and then we fetch it and we format it as a CSV and doing stuff. I just thought it was a really neat little feature. You can also do the same thing with importing. This one I haven't done yet for my own website, but people keep asking me to, so I'll probably will eventually have to do this one. But yeah, you can just basically take a CSV and then it will parse it, and then you know, assuming that the fields are named correctly, it'll just put it right in the database for you. So there's tons of SQL features that I haven't showed, like stored procedures, and just a million different things. The JOOQ documentation is really good, and they have examples of everything. I mean, SQL features I've never even used in 20 years of doing software development. And you should just go on the website and check it out. I obviously just covered sort of the basic stuff, but the website's really good, the documentation's really good. So the code generation is a really important part of what JOOQ does, and though you could use JOOQ without using code generation, it would be painful. I wouldn't recommend it. So it can generate a lot of different things. It's very customizable. But the basic things are, you know, tables, records, POJOs. It can actually build an interface for you, so that you don't have to. You can just have like a drink interface and pass that around places. I don't use that one. I also don't use the DAOs. It can actually generate DAOs with finders and things for you. Sequences, procedures. Here's an example of what this code looks like. It's a little bit hard to read here. Maybe I'll just switch back to IntelliJ. So this is all I've generated. Namespace. So this is what it looks like. It's very verbose, but this is so like here is where it actually will show you. It's a drink tank, right? It actually will have the SQL data type it is, and this is how it's going to do type safety for you. So it will map when you do aware with drink type or slug, right? It will know how to map to a varchar and what types are acceptable. So there's a couple of different ways you can do the code generation. Like there's an XML file that configures which types of classes you want to generate, if you want to have the POJOs or the DAOs configured. It can also do like type changing. So like for dates, for example, it's going to use java.sql.timestamp or java.sql.date field. But if you would rather use the JDK8 time classes or Joda time, and you can do that. So it's highly configurable. You can just do it in the XML file, check that in, and then have a simple Gradle task to parse that and run the code generation, which is the recommended way on the website. I like using the Gradle plugin because I don't like to check generated sources into source control for obvious reasons. It makes two people modifying the schema at the same time very difficult. So I use the Gradle plugin, and that essentially, anytime I run a liquid-based migration, code generation will run immediately afterwards, or if I just check the code out and it'll generate the code, it'll hook in to all the right Gradle up-to-date check-in stuff. So anytime there's a change, it'll just generate those stuff for you. And I'll show you what that looks like. It's a pretty nice plugin. You can actually have multiple, like if you were going to connect to multiple databases and you wanted to generate multiple source sets for each different schema, you can do that really easily with this. But you just have to give basic JDBC connection information, and then those are actually, we're doing some of the custom type conversion. So I'm telling that I want to use a local date and local date time instead of Java dot SQL dot timestamp or dot date. And then you can, this is also where you would specify, like I'm just saying, I want POJOs and to use JPA annotations. You can also, it can generate like Fluent POGOs, it can generate immutable POGOs, it can do all kinds of different generation here. So, advantages over straight JDBC. Type safety, which I've probably said like 15 times during this presentation so far, is one of my absolute favorite things. And that gives you, compile time errors for your SQL over runtime errors, which I always personally would prefer, especially because I tend to go too fast and make a lot of mistakes when I'm writing SQL, and so I get a much earlier warning. And as I'm a heavy IntelliJ user, I basically depend on auto-completion for everything. I don't think that I even know like a third of the groovy methods by heart. Like everything is autocomplete. So having that for the schema is really handy as well. So advantages over Hibernate, and this is a lot more personal opinion than like straight fact, right? But this is a lower level of abstraction, and so you're going to be more familiar with how your schema actually works, I think, than if you are using an ORM. SQL over HQL, and the reason I'm saying that is just because with JOOQ you can use a lot more features of SQL that you can't use with HQL, because anytime you're using something that's going to try to be database agnostic, you're not going to be able to use database specific features as easily. Now JOOQ does that, but you tell it what database that you're going to be generating SQL for when you create an instance of that DSL context class I mentioned earlier. And when you do that, it's going to generate SQL specifically for that database. And so you can use the database specific features and still get compile time checking. Basically, if you try to use something in JOOQ and that database doesn't support that feature, it'll just tell you. So have people heard of the object relational impedance mismatch? This is a term that essentially means that you're taking an object and you're mapping that to a relational database, which is by definition doesn't have an object model, and that when you do that, there's something lost in that translation. And there are things that you can represent easily in a relational model that are very difficult to represent in an object model, and vice versa. And so we're still ending up with a list of objects or a single object in the end. But without the ORM in the middle, trying to become a lowest common denominator between relational databases, I think that you have sort of a lower mismatch between those two models. There's a website, hibernate-alternative.com, which is, I think, also done by Lucas Eder. It has a longer-winded explanation of some of these things. So we're actually getting close to the end. So this is one of the things that was the biggest reason why we picked JOOQ over Hibernate, right? Because Hibernate it's super easy, ORM is super easy, it does a lot of great stuff for you. But when you're using something like Ratpack and you're in an asynchronous model, right? And you need to know every time that you're going to be blocking for I/O or for any other reason, right? And with Hibernate, that's not always easy to tell, right? So here's just a really simple bit of like GOR, right? So you do book.get, give it an ID, and then you call book.author. How many times in those two lines of code are you going to block? It's either one or two, and it depends on how you map things, right? I mean, are you going to lazily map author or eagerly fetch author? And then if you have something like, so if you're using Grails and you have open session of view turned on, and then you do this inside of a GSP, you can actually end up blocking it inside of your GSP. Which is one reason why when I do use Grails, I typically turn off open session of view. I don't know if Grails 3 still has that on by default or not, but Grails 2 did. So that essentially, that just doesn't work when you're doing a Rat Pack. You have to know every time that you're going to make a call out to the database. With JOOQ, you have to know when that's happening because you're going to call a DAO class. Every time that DAO does something, it's going to talk to the database. And there is no eager fetching, right? You're going to write your own queries, and so it's going to force you to understand when you're blocking and when you're not blocking. Rat Pack is really great. I love working with it. You know, I've been doing it for a couple of years now, really, and I enjoyed working in that sort of asynchronous model. And you do lose some like easy functionality you get with Hibernate, but I think that you understand what's going on a bit more. And that's not to say that it's always the right case to pick like JOOQ and Rat Pack. There are still times when I start a new Rails project and use that instead, but there are also times when I'm going to use Rat Pack. In fact, honestly, with Seller HQ, which is essentially an Excel spreadsheet in a web app, Rat Pack is really not like the greatest fit for that. I mean, it works, and I enjoy building it, and I learned so much that I never would have learned if I had never taken out this side project. But Grails, like that's Grails' sweet spot. We could have finished in a third the amount of time probably with Grails, but with Rat Pack I learned a lot, and it's become very useful in my day job as well, where we use Rat Pack for things that are probably a better fit for Rat Pack. But doing this, I think, has made me a better developer in general, and that's not just for for Grails or for Rat Pack or for any other developing you're going to do. I think that's actually the last slide. So, what about MongoDB? So this is my question slide, and there are no bad questions except for this one. Questions?
Are there any? It seems a little verbose. It seems like Groovy could kind of soften some edges. I mean, I really like JOOQ. I've used it a little bit. But is there any sort of a maybe like a Grails plugin or something that can kind of hide a little bit of the noise, because it's a little verbose, a little noisy?
It is, and so I'm curious. There's not that I know of. For Rat Pack, there's a little module you can use that will give you a couple of helpers, but it's not gonna help with like when you're just writing the queries. You're just gonna have to kind of go do that. I think that you could write a GORM that delegated to this instead of Hibernate. I think the hard part would be generating the generated code from a GORM domain class rather than using a Hibernate entity. I'm really interested in that idea, but I've never done it because I don't have a reason to, and I think it would take a bit of time. But I think you could. There's no reason why you couldn't do the dynamic finders and just generate that query for you.
Well, I was thinking about like you had an example of a finder, the active record.
Sure. Yeah.
And then you did the reset, and then you did basically a save or update.
Yep.
And I was thinking that'd be nice to have that just as a smart call. It just says save or update, and it would reset the ID if it needed to, and it would just generate one if it needed to. And small stuff like that, just little.
Yeah, you could do that. You could probably do. You could do an AST like with so you could have like a drink DAO class and add an AST, or it would add basically a bunch of stuff that would do that, right? You could just pass a list of fields that you wanted to reset, something like that. That would be neat. I find that a lot. Like ASTs are hard to write, but they can also provide a ton of value. Like I was in your GORM talk yesterday, and every time I write an AST, it's really mind bending for the first couple of hours, and then what you end up with is you really can reduce boilerplate code.
Yep.
Any other questions? Yes.
So when you, so this can work with different databases, how much changes when you generate the code from database to database that you need to worry about within your app?
It depends on what database features you use. Like most of the time, it's not going to change very much. And I switched from MySQL to Postgres at one point. We originally started with MySQL and then we switched to Postgres. One reason was we wanted, there's like a JSON data type in Postgres, which I don't think MySQL has yet. None of the SQL that we were using changed at that time. We're not really doing anything very complicated though. We're not doing stored procedures, which I think would be an area, or like universal data types. There's lots of Oracle specific stuff, or like I don't use Oracle very often, but Oracle SQL is definitely a little bit different. And so I suspect if you went to Oracle from MySQL, you would see a lot more changes. But I didn't have to do anything. All I got to do was start adding to use the SQL or the JSON data type. Yeah.
You said it doesn't help you with the transactions. Can you show some of the transactional handling you're doing for Seller HQ?
No, because honestly, almost everything just updates a single table, and so we actually just don't even bother. It's just if it fails, it fails. Like we don't really do inside of like because it's really a simple CRUD app. So you're only adding a row to essentially one thing. I can look. I think the only place we were using transactions is in user creation. But it just calls like a JDBC method to start a transaction and then end it. Let me see if I can remember where this is.
It's very pluggable. When I used it, it was very easy to wire in Spring's transaction management and just have that all work because we were actually using Hibernate and JOOQ in the same app. So it's all interface based. It's all very pluggable, and it was just a handful of half a page of code.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't used it with Spring, but there's no reason why you can't use both right next to each other. And let's see. I'm not sure. I'll look at it afterwards and I'll tweet about it. This is a little helper we had. This just makes it a little bit easier to. We wanted to do a case where we would select every column out of one table, and then specific columns out of a couple of other tables. And JOOQ has two flavors for fetching things, where you either do everything from a table, or you list individual columns. And we didn't want to list all 20 columns in one table, so we had a couple little helpers in here. That's not where the transaction. Oh yeah, I'll look for it afterwards. I'll tweet the links to the slides, and also all the Seller HQ code is open source. And like I said, it's a pretty simple app, but I think it's a decent example of using JOOQ and Ratpack together. All right, well, thanks a lot, everyone. Enjoy the last of the conference. I went super fast.